In 1935, we were spending just less than 3% of GDP on defence, and we failed to either appease or deter Hitler. When the war then broke out in 1939, that 3% shot up to 19%. And in 1940, when we were fighting for our very lives and our existence, it was 46%. Those figures are the extraordinarily horrific figures that you need to spend when you've got to fight a war. How much better it would have been in the mid-late 1930s if we'd spent just a bit more on defence and actually deterred Hitler.
Former military and intelligence chiefs are warning Keir Starmer that Britain faces a 1936 moment and say he must raise defence spending to 5% of GDP to avoid future conflict. In a letter signed by senior defence figures including Ben Wallace and Richard Dearlove, they say that years of underfunding have left the armed forces unprepared to deter threats such as Russia. Former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt, also signed that letter, and he joins me now. Good afternoon, Lord Dannatt.
Seb, good afternoon to you.
So it's been said this is a 1936 moment, echoing, of course, the run-up to the Second World War. Do you see that war is being likely or a big problem if action is not taken by the government?
Well, the reason that we've called it a 1936 moment is that is exactly what it is. And if you just turn the pages back to look at the history of the mid-late 1930s, you'll see this. In 1935, we were spending just less than 3% of GDP on defence, and we failed to either appease or deter Hitler. When the war then broke out in 1939, that 3% shot up to 19%. And in 1940, when we were fighting for our very lives and our existence, it was 46%. Those figures are the extraordinarily horrific figures that you need to spend when you've got to fight a war. How much better it would have been in the mid-late 1930s if we'd spent just a bit more on defence and actually deterred Hitler. Exactly the same point now. If we increase our defence expenditure to 3% by 29 and 3.5% by 34, which are the figures that we're really calling for, all within an ultimate goal of 5%, then there is a very good chance that we can deter further aggression from Vladimir Putin's Russia. And this generation of young people won't have to go through the fighting and the horrors of the generation of my father's and grandfather's generations.
Well, I feel I've been kicking around politics for long enough, Lord Dannatt, to remember when there was much concern that the UK wasn't hitting the NATO target of spending 2.5% of its GDP on defence. And in your letter, you're talking about 5% of GDP, which is obviously a very significant figure. What is the significance of 5%, and what kind of time frame do you think that we should hit that?
Well, the significance of 5% is that's broadly what we were spending on defence in this country in the 1980s, the last decade of the Cold War, when Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher's leadership of the West increased our conventional capability to complement our nuclear capability, and with a number of other things, notwithstanding their firm leadership of the West, it saw off eventually the threat from the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So 5% isn't a figure just plucked out of the air. It's the figure that we've had to spend in the past to preserve our security. Now, within that 5%, there are various elements. Up to 3.5% of that, which needs to be found pretty quickly, is what we in this country and other leading European NATO members need to spend to get our hard power, our military capability, up to that deterrent level. The other 1.5% are some of the things which we need to do to improve our overall national resilience, our overall ability to fight and to contain aggression should it be needed, particularly on some of the countries on mainland Europe, upgrades to bridges so that they can take main battle tanks, upgrades to port facilities, and that applies to us as well, to make sure that our overall national preparation and preparedness is great enough to be able to have a military capability that is credible enough to deter future aggression from Putin's Russia. That's what the 5% is all about. But the critical bit, and this is where this government really needs to bite the bullet, is we need to see a programme of spending to take us to 3% by 2029 and to 3.5% by 2034, so that the Ministry of Defence has the confidence to plan, British industry has the confidence to invest in what it needs, and the money is there on the table, that contracts can be signed and money will be delivered, and that we will get the military capability when we need it, which is as soon as possible, to make sure we've got the deterrent capability to make sure that Vladimir Putin does not risk another confrontation with the West.
Now, Lord Dannatt, if we were able to get to this and the Prime Minister listens to your advice, do we have the supply chain and know-how to deliver this? Because there's been lots of concerns about the Ministry of Defence's ability to spend money prudently and effectively, because hitting the target is one thing, making it reality is a different one. Do you have confidence in that?
Well, that, of course, is the challenge that the Ministry of Defence has had to be fighting with for a number of years. But just because it's a challenge doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't try and rise to meet it. It's down to this government to go on with defence procurement reforms to try and make the Ministry of Defence's procurement systems, in partnership with British industry, as efficient as possible, and to do it as quickly as possible. Now, it's a funny old thing. You look at what's been going on in Ukraine for the last 4 years. They have faced a major threat. They are fighting a bloody war, and their procurement cycles have got faster and faster, innovation and counter-innovation, as they have had to meet the threats that have changed around them. That's what you do when you're faced with a major threat such as the Ukrainians have had. And we've got to be honest and say that we are actually facing the same sort of threat. So we've got to cut the red tape, we've got to cut the bureaucracy, we've got to be much more agile, much more flexible. But critically, almost the first stage is to vote more money into the defence budget so that contracts can be let to British industry. They will then fire up their production lines and start to produce the ammunition and the missiles that we require, start to produce the ships, the aircraft, the submarines, the main battle tanks, the drones, the high-tech equipment that we require. They'll only do it if they believe that the money is there on the table, and the Ministry of Defence will write contracts and pay them to do these things. So it's a vicious circle, but it's got to start, I'm afraid, with the Prime Minister telling the Chancellor, find the extra money that I've been talking about at Munich and other places, get the money on the table, that'll fire up British industry, and actually that will also help national growth as well. And the economy will start to expand partly on the back of a growth and expansion in defence industry.
And lastly, Lord Dannatt, while I have you here, you served as Constable of the Tower of London and have frequently spoken about the King's very personal relationship with the armed forces. There's been obviously a lot of developments in royal news today. How do you think the King would be feeling following the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and where does this leave the royal family?
Well, the King will be supremely conscious of his responsibilities as our sovereign, our monarch, and of head of state, and that will be his highest priority. Obviously, he will be sad that his younger brother would appear to be letting the side down. I mean, Andrew talks about admitting no wrongdoing, so we have to credit him with that at this stage. That's the nature of our constitution, the nature of our society. But the King will place his highest duty, as his mother did, on her responsibilities, now his responsibilities, to lead the nation forward as our sovereign and as our monarch. The sadness for the family is the sadness of Andrew's behaviour, proven or not as it may well be at some point in the future. But the King's highest priority will be to do his duty to maintain our love and respect for him, and he will do his best to continue to serve us as his subjects, as he is doing and his mother did before him.
Well, thank you. That was Lord Richard Dannatt, the former head of the British Army.